Okay. Mae, are you there? Hi,
Hi
Mae.
there. How you doing, Ben?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I'm going to turn this computer around, and then you should have a view of your audience.
Perfect.
Oh, no, wait. I need to turn the video on here. Well, there you
Hi,
go.
everyone.
Okay, so this is Mae Smith. She is a staff writer on she was a staff writer, or you were an assistant writer, a writer's assistant on Billions, right?
Hmm.
And then a staff writer on Rebecca Cutter's show Hightown.
I was a writer's assistant on Hightown.
Oh, okay. What was your
Yeah.
first writing credit?
My first writing credit was Hightown. I got a co-write while I was a writing assistant.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. That's cool. And now you are a staff writer on a new science fiction show from
Yeah.
Sony.
I'm an executive story editor now, so I've moved up a couple levels from staff writer.
Oh, excellent. Okay, cool.
And I was
Well,
actually between that a story editor on Billions again, but that time as a writer.
and story editor is a rank of writer, right?
Yes, staff writer
Actually,
is the first rank.
why don't you quickly, before you get into your story, why don't you walk people through the ranks of the story, the writing ranks?
Totally, yeah. So the first rank is staff writer. Next would be story editor, and then executive story editor, and then co-producer, producer, consulting producer, supervising producer, and then co-executive producer and executive producer. So there are a
Right.
lot of ranks to move up.
Yes.
Once you hit the co-producer level, you're expected to like really take on a lot of producing duties on set, or at least that's how it used to be. Now most people are kind of like kicked off the show after we write. And that's one of the things we're fighting for in the current negotiations with the WGA, which I'm sure you've heard about as well.
That's right. That's right. Okay, well, why don't you walk us through your journey? What you graduated college not so long ago.
Yep, I graduated in 2014. I went to
Uh-huh.
Columbia. I studied film. I also studied evolutionary biology for a little while. And after I graduated, it was really tough to find a gig. But finally, I landed at Participant Media, specifically Pivot, which was their television arm. I was working as a receptionist, and then I sort of got promoted to office manager / helping out with ad sales and marketing sales, because I wasn't quite ready to go to LA. So a lot of the creative work is based in LA. So I sort of got in more on the business side.
Right. And what does Participant fill people in? What do they do?
Yeah, so Participant Media, it's run by Jeff Skoll, and it's a socially conscious production company, basically. So they've made a lot of features and documentaries that you would have seen. They made like the Snowden documentary, the Malala documentary, and then on the feature side, they did things like Bridge of Spies was them. They have a very long list of credits. Basically, like they fund anything that they think like furthers social good. So they like co-produce a lot of stuff. So if you look up their credits, you'll recognize a ton of stuff. The TV side was supposed to be like a cable network aimed towards millennials. And I think if it had happened like 10 years earlier, it would have been a hit. But basically it kind of started to dissolve because streaming was really taking over. And so it was around that time, I was there about a year, where I was like, I am not ready to move to LA still. And I wanted a more holistic view of the industry because I felt like I was getting a really, really narrow scope. So I decided to go to an agency. So I went to APA. I started in the mailroom.
That's right. Started in the mailroom.
Yep. And this is again in New York.
Yep.
Yes. And the mailroom in New York is going to be very different than the mailroom you find in LA. It's a lot less structured. It's a lot smaller, which means both that you're doing more and have less support, but also that you have a lot more face time with the agents.
Right. Right. So that can be
that's
a
sort
real
of the
advantage.
trade-off.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So I was in the mailroom for 4 or 5 months, which it's not that long. And then I moved up into a theater literary desk for Beth Blickers, who is a New York theater legend. She represents a lot of playwrights. And she was trying to transition a lot of her playwrights into TV so that they could actually make money. So because TV was my main focus, I was a really great asset to that desk, and I got to help all these amazing playwrights write their first pilots and like taught them what an act out is, you know, like the thing that happens right before a commercial break to make you come back, things that they just hadn't thought of in playwriting. So that was a really great experience, both in the business side, because I got to have my own clients, I got to negotiate contracts, I got to figure out how rights and royalties work, which I did not know anything really about before, just that they were good. And I really learned a lot from those writers and from my boss, who she took a very like dramaturgical approach to giving notes. And I learned just a lot about writing. I read so many scripts on that desk, which is my biggest advice, is just read as much as you can. That's how you develop your taste. It's how you like develop your style. It's how you honestly sometimes gain the confidence to know that you're good enough to do this. Because you read what's getting made and you're like, I could definitely do that or better, you know? And then it's the process of actually doing that or better, which is a separate thing. But honing your taste is the very first step. So I was on that desk for about a year, and then I got into the Writers Guild of America East Made in New York Writers Room program, which was the first year of this fellowship that they're doing. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. They did it a couple times after my year. Where basically they funded us to be paired with a showrunner mentor and develop a pilot for 6 months to a year. I think we wound up really developing 2 pilots in that time, and get the full experience of what it is to work on deadlines, to work with someone who has worked in a professional writer's room. And we got to meet a lot of people along the way.
So you were juggling that with your work at APA?
No, I mean, honestly, I quit APA after that because the fellowship paid more. Which I mean, agency pay has gotten a lot better because of a big movement called Pay Up Hollywood that happened a couple of years ago, like right before the pandemic. But when I was there in 2016, I was making $26,000 a year in New York City.
That's tough.
It was not great. And I truly, like, if I hadn't been living with a partner, it would not have been possible. So I always caveat that, because like there are like costs to doing these entry-level jobs. Not everyone is able to do those, but if you can find a way, like access is the first thing you need.
So that's great. So you got partnered with a showrunner. And I'm sorry, did you say what showrunner you got partnered with?
It was with Norman Steinberg, who is this comedy legend. He ran Cosby and Teach. He co-wrote Blazing Saddles with Mel Brooks. He taught me how to craft a joke. But he was also, my script was like about a trans Muslim journalist, a student journalist at a college. And this was, you know, like right at the beginning of Transparent. So there wasn't a lot of shows or like, I guess like media literacy about this. And so me and Norm like really went back and forth, and he was like, I don't know, like, can we make a show like this funny? And it wasn't about biases. It was just about, you know, he grew up with this like traditional network sense, right? Of how do you do this? And like network television was its own specific thing. And so that really was one of my best preps for how do you get new stuff through like old guard systems. And by the end of that process, like Norm and I were so tight, and he really like came around on a lot of that stuff. And we figured out how to, I don't want to say make things palatable, but like incept people into accepting things. And that was the best training I ever could have had, because it taught me how to be diplomatic. It taught me how to get a note through. It taught me how to argue with a note in a respectful way, and to hear the note behind the note, and really to hear that like a lot of notes come from fear. And that is not a malicious thing.
That's such a great concept that I haven't gotten into, really, is the note behind the note.
Yes. The note behind the note is everything.
What does that mean to you? What's the note behind the note?
The note behind the note. So executives aren't writers. So when they give a note, they will usually offer a solution. Usually that solution will be horrifying. Not always. There are some executives who have like really incredible spot on story sense. But when you hear a horrifying note, you have to ask, like, what are they really saying? Are they saying that the scene is boring? Are they saying that they don't understand the character? Are they saying that they need something funnier? because usually they won't just come out and say something like that. They're going to offer something that's going to give you a clue to what they actually want.
Right.
So it's a lot of like the people skills of this business are so underrated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like Norm was honestly my best training for that. And
Yeah.
I'm really proud of the work we did together.
That's great.
Yeah. So after that,
Yeah.
I was like
After that, yes.
trying to get into a writer's room in New York. There are very few writers' rooms in New York. So I interviewed for a bunch. One of them, which will remain anonymous, I got really close to getting a writer's assistant job, and I was told that I was passed over for the showrunner's cousin's mistress. And I just want to be very honest that that sometimes happens, and we just have to laugh at that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the truth is, like, the more you interview, the closer you get. And
Yeah.
what
And
I would
those
always do,
assistant jobs are very competitive.
they're so competitive. And when you're a writer, you're in the room and you have limited weeks, you want someone you can really rely on, right? So there's also, everything comes from fear. Like everything that's hard about this business is about fear and like wanting to feel trusted and safe. And so a lot of times they go with people who come with a lot of recommendations, which again is an access problem. So what I did is every time I got rejected from a writer's assistant job, I would ask the assistants who had set up the job, or even if the showrunner was like really lovely and sent me a direct note, if they would get a coffee or a drink with me at any time. That was convenient for them. And in that way, I created my own access because every time I got rejected, I made a friend.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And friends are really like this
Uh-huh.
whole thing. People will tell you to network and make connections, but connections won't advocate for you and friends will. So just like figure out who you like and try to be close to those people.
That's great. And then you do have, because you're saying it's all about those recommendations. And once you've
Yeah,
made the friend, you didn't get that job, but you got a recommendation for the next job interview.
truly. And honestly, most of my early jobs in this field were all based on recommendations from people who had prior rejected me.
What are what are for this for my students, what are the responsibilities of a writer's assistant technically and in fact, in actuality?
Yeah, so writers' assistants, their main responsibility is to take notes in the room. So while the writers are going through story, while they are talking about character arcs and all that, they are taking notes, organizing them, and sending them out at the end of every day. Some rooms also require that writer's assistant keep the cards, which kind of like show the story beats that we're working with on the board, so that they keep them organized. That changes room per room. The truth is that everything is showrunner specific. And no writer's assistant job, writer's PA job, or script coordinator job, all of which I have done, are the same.
Right.
So writer's PA, for those who don't know, is, I mean, the main priority is getting lunch, because writers are hungry all the time. And keeping the office. So it's keeping the office stocked with supplies. It is keeping, snacks on the table, because again, snacks, very important. Bubbly water, very important. All this stuff sounds silly, but like when you're in a room 8 hours a day with the same people, like it's very easy to get cranky if you are not fed and hydrated.
So yeah, that's right. So at this point, so you have the fellowship, and the fellowship is paying you better than your prior job.
Yeah.
And is that while you are interviewing for writer's assistant jobs, or is that after?
That's after.
Right. So how are you supporting yourself while you're applying?
Yeah, so I'm working at a startup called Spacious, which no longer exists, but it was like a co-working startup that set up co-working spaces in dinner-only restaurants during the day. And I was a host at one of these things. So I checked people in, I made coffee, and I worked on my own stuff during the day. It was not a lot of money, but it was still more than the agency. Even though I was working part-time, but it was enough to like get by, and I was actively applying. But that was really only a runway of like 3 or 4 months where I could do that. I was also doing some like odd graphic design and copywriting jobs, which, always having like a side hustle in the beginning of this is really just good to fall back on. And those were, I've had a graphic design business since I was in high school, so I sort of like go back and forth to that when I need to. But then I realized like I had student loans and I wanted to pay them off, and I just wanted to be debt free. And so I took a job at a crypto entertainment company, which is as ridiculous as it sounds. I started as the executive assistant to the chief strategic officer. It was more money than I had ever been paid in my life to do less than I had ever done. And of course, I could have just like taken that win and chilled and done the bare minimum and collected my paycheck. Instead, I totally drank the Kool-Aid. I got very invested in the company. I got promoted twice in 3 months. Because I am unable to invest, which is something you will see with a lot of writers. And I really became invested in like what a crypto landscape could look like in funding and automating the rights royalty payments of our business. Unfortunately, like many blockchain companies, that company tanked. And at the end of 2018, the price of Ethereum dropped dramatically and they laid off 20% of the company. So I was laid off, and that was a relief at that point because I was really feeling like this isn't going to work. I was feeling disillusioned, and I was missing writing, and I just wanted to go back to that track. So the day I got laid off, I called one of my best friends who I had met at the agency, and she happened to work on Billions as the showrunner's assistant at the time. And I asked if she wanted to get a drink that night because I was sad. And she said, no, our writer's assistant just quit. So things are kind of crazy here. Can we do it another day? And then there was this long pause. And like 2 days later, I was hired on Billions as the writer's assistant. I had interviewed for that job before and been rejected.
But now
Pre-fellowship.
Now you had better recommendations.
Now I had better recommendations, their former assistant and the friend I was talking about. And I also had crypto experience, and there was a crypto storyline.
Right.
So that was very exciting to them. And then their script court also like won a Sundance fellowship and had to leave. So I wound up taking over for the script court as well. So for the last 3 months of season 4, I was the writer's assistant, the script court, and for the last week, I was also the writer's PA.
So when you say script court, you mean the script coordinator?
Yes. And their job is to make sure that everyone has the right version of the script at the right time. So it means proofing it for like continuity and grammar, and like some places will ask for character consistency as well if you're really like a trusted story person. And then making sure that like the actors, the production team, and everyone else gets that and the changes tracked very clearly at the correct stage.
So you really have to be a master of screenwriting format to do a job like that.
Very much master format. And also I would say you have to be so detail oriented. Like it's the sort of thing where if they cut a scene, a later scene might not make sense, but in a really small way. So you have to be able to catch that stuff because like, especially in the world of Twitter, like this is how shows get torn apart. And a lot of times when you're in production, those changes happen last minute. Like you can't get a location because it falls through, and you need to cut an entire location from the script. And so you get to work really closely with both the showrunners and also the assistant director, who like, honestly, I don't know how anyone does that job. It is so insane.
Yeah, it is an insane job.
And the first AD is like your best friend when you're a script coord. You guys are like, you know, just trying to keep everything on rails. So, and you get to see each version of the script progress. So you get to see how things change with notes from the network. You get to see how things changed after the cast reads it, which especially when you're in a later season show, like the cast has a lot of pull. And so you really get to learn like how things get better.
You get to see how a writer perceives the note behind the note and applies it to the screenplay.
Absolutely. So that was another like incredible training ground. And I found because I'm a really like obsessively detail oriented person that I'm very suited for the script court job. So, and Brian and David, who are the showrunners of Billion at the time, and the creators, they saw that as well. So they like spoke very highly of me to a bunch of peers. And one of their old assistants who was then like working with other people at the end of season 4 was like, hey, would you be down to move to LA? I know of a show looking for a script coord. So I had the option to come back for season 5, but there was going to be like a 5-month hiatus and I could not go 5 months without work. So I moved out to LA with 5 days notice in March 2019 for a script coord job on the Apple show Invasion. And part of that was because the showrunner was like, you know, you're not just a script coord. I know you're an aspiring writer. I want you to have a seat at the table. I want you to be able to pitch. That is not the case in every room. For the writer's assistant or the script coord.
But you can get stuck in those roles, can't you?
Absolutely. And a big part of it is like, walking the line between the attitude of like, I'm not too good for this job and I'm going to do this job very well, but I also am a writer and I'm learning and I'm not doing this forever. So there's a balance between projecting those things and like coming off as cocky, or like not knowing your place. So I think actually working outside of the industry helped me with that a lot, because I think this industry tends to keep you at an assistant level for a really long time, which can be difficult. And also can kind of change the way you carry yourself, right? I think having worked in another industry and managed people, I carried myself in a way that made it clear that I was like not just an assistant. I don't like that phrase because assistants are like the powerhouse of every single show, but so that helped a lot. I moved out here a year before the pandemic. I did that show. It was an incredible group of writers. And the showrunner was not lying. Like, I had a seat at the table. I pitched a ton.
And that's a big deal, right? As an assistant, but once you've done the job and done it well, and you can start, insisting or at least looking for jobs and hoping that you actually get a chance to pitch, right?
Totally.
And so you were able to actually choose a job where you were given the opportunity to pitch and be part of the story crafting process.
Absolutely. And there is a line between like having the opportunity to pitch or write a sample scene and being exploited, right? So I think that's something you realize the longer you start to get those opportunities, that it's like there's a point where you're like, wow, I am really learning and I'm getting to show what I can do here. And then it can tip very easily over into, why am I doing all this free work? Because now I think what's happening with smaller rooms is a lot of assistants are being used as like free staff writers.
That's probably true.
Yeah. And so I'd say towards the end of my assistant run, that was starting to happen a little, and I really had to put my foot down. But I felt empowered to do that. But on Invasion, it was a really great situation. Honestly, there was just a lot of like politicking at the top because Apple was a new network at the time, and like there was just a lot of confusion about like, is it being run as a tech company or a network? And because of that, there was a big leadership shakeup, and my entire writer's room was fired except for me, because we were starting production in a week and they did not want to replace the script cord. I did not want to stay at a place where I was basically just doing a production job and didn't have a voice on the story, because I had gotten so used to that. So one of the writers who had gotten let go, and also when I say let go, writers who get let go still get paid out through their contracts. So this is why unions are good. But he had a friend, Rebecca Cutter, who also went to college with Ben.
That's right. My old friend Rebecca,
Yes, who had a season 2 show that just got greenlit called Hightown on Stars, and she was looking for a new writer's assistant. So he connected me with her, and I was hired on that, and I left Invasion right before production. Did not make friends by doing that.
Really?
Well, yeah, but it was with, non-writing producers basically, which is, you still want those relationships, but it would have been over a year of my life of not having any story input, and I was not willing to do that.
Now, on the other hand, someday when you rise to executive producer, you may miss that you didn't get that production experience under your belt.
Well, it's different because I wouldn't have been on set, right? A script supervisor is different than a script coordinator.
Well, that's true, yeah.
Script coordinators are remote, and you're just, I got the production experience on Billions, on the script cord side. So I was sort of like, I feel like I've had that experience and it wouldn't be advanced here. So it was a little bit of a like brutal choice. But every writer I knew supported me in it. I really did like a gut check to make sure I was doing the right thing. So, and those relationships will be fine ultimately. Just in the moment.
They'll remember you as a very good, diligent script coordinator in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I found my replacement, like I made it seamless. So then I went to Hightown, which was also just an amazing group of people and like a really good show, like really fun and deeply felt, and had a lot of stuff we hadn't seen on TV. It had, like a queer Latinx lead, and was about drug addiction. It's about the opioid crisis in Cape Cod and P-Town. So like I did that, and I started to get the opportunity to write scenes there. which was really great. When I say scenes, I mean like outline beats. So
Uh-huh.
they would group write outlines,
Mhm.
and which is a pretty common practice for like the first draft, and then the writer of the episode will take it and kind of make it their own and weave it. But I started taking like a scene here, a scene there. And in that, I really showed that I understood the show, I understood the characters, and I knew how to write. Um,
Mhm.
and by, I'd say like 3 months in, Rebecca offered me a co-write for episode 8.
Mhm.
So I got to co-write episode 8 with her assistant, Kayla Westergaard Dobson, who's also fantastic.
Mhm.
And that was my first professional writing credit. We were finishing that up and handing in our like final production draft right
Uh-huh.
around, I'm going to say March 15th, 2020. So we went virtual, obviously, and we
Uh-huh.
finished the room for the last like month and change remotely.
Yeah.
It was a really good experience. It was seamless. It was easy. Like
Mhm.
I could not ask for a better or more dream first credit, honestly.
Yeah.
After that, I had sort of been talking to an agent at APA,
Mhm.
um, someone I had trained in the mailroom,
Uh-huh.
who we just like really connected, and she was
Yeah.
fantastic. And she had moved to LA about 2 years before me.
Yeah.
And she wanted to rep me. And so we were just waiting for a few things. We were waiting for me to have my first credit so she could sell me to the higher ups as
Mhm.
someone who had a built-in network and wasn't
Uh-huh.
going to be hard to get work for.
Right.
Um, and then the other thing is we were waiting for the ATA, the talent agent like strike that was happening to end.
Uh-huh.
Because for a year and a half, all writers fired their agents to end the practice of packaging,
Right.
which is a really, I think it's a great thing. A lot of people were against that action. Packaging at its heart was a misalignment of incentives for agents. It basically meant that
Right.
their incentive was to get as many people from their agency on the same project, and they would take
Right.
a percentage of the total production budget
Mhm.
instead of commission from their clients. And a lot of
Yeah.
times it meant that agents were making more than their clients.
Right. Right.
Um, so there,
Um,
yeah,
but it was certainly more controversial than the strike that may happen uh, in the next day or so.
much,
Um,
much more controversial. Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is that really those early jobs in the mailroom as an assistant were as important. Well, you tell me, as important as the later jobs in the writer's room to getting you signed with an agent and to the next step.
Absolutely. I feel like my agency job gave me access, and that was the main thing I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have. Like, I'm first generation college student. Like my parents didn't go to college. No one I know
Yeah.
worked in this business when I started. All I knew that I just needed to know as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And did I freeze?
You
Um,
did.
yeah. I also got to make just not like quantity of connections, but quality of connections. Like I met the people I want to be running this industry.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to like rise together and like lift each other up as
Mm-hmm.
we climb. I think that support system is not only important for advancing, but also important for emotional support, because this can be a really emotionally draining business.
Yeah.
Because writing's emotional, and a lot of
Yeah.
stuff that happens is not fair, and doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense and is about nepotism. So, you kind of have to create your own network of people who
Yeah.
understand what you're trying to do.
That's right. So then you had your first writing credit and you got your agent. And what happened next?
So then there was the pandemic. So things kind of like really stopped dead. I
Mm-hmm.
started taking a lot of general meetings, which is, I describe them as like first dates with people who aren't single yet,
Yeah.
where you're like set up with a producer or a network, and you both kind of talk about how great it would be to work together and all the things you have in common. And then it's like, well, we'll see.
Right.
Um, they
That says there, I like your shoes meeting.
Yes, the I like your shoes meetings. I love that. Yes, that is Beth. Oh my God, Beth had such good advice for those meetings. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think those meetings can matter. Like they feel sometimes a little like you're just kind of like performing your personality in a way where you're like, please like me.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately they will, a lot of them will pay off, and you'll meet people you really want to work with. So it's just expanding that network
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Um, And so I did a lot of that. I was working 2 more script core jobs during the pandemic just to make money. I met a lot of cool writers on those jobs.
Mhm.
Once you're repped, it's a lot easier to be like, I'm going to take this job, but if I get staffed, I'm going to leave. And
Mhm.
that is a really good way to tell people that like you're not there forever and like you're not
Yeah.
a career assistant,
Right.
But I met great people through that. And then finally in, I want to say August of 2021, I got staffed on a show called Parish on AMC.
Mhm.
It's going to come out next year. It's starring Giancarlo
Exciting.
Esposito. Um,
Cool.
and the showrunner of that was Theo Travers, who had been on Billions, but we had not overlapped. So the reason I was even able to get a meeting, because getting showrunners meetings are so hard, because again, it's the recommendation thing. I was
Yeah.
only able to get a meeting because every person I knew on Billions who knew Theo said something and was like,
Amazing.
May is great.
Yeah.
And then the co-showrunner of Hightown, Gary Lennon, also worked with Theo on Power.
Uh-huh.
And so then he also put in a word. So all said and done, I had 7 recommendations just to get my sample read by Theo,
Right.
um, which is crazy, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
worked. He read it. He wanted to meet with me. And then actually we met. It went great. And he wound up
Mhm.
not hiring me at first because they didn't have enough money. And he sent me a note apologizing, saying it was just financial and he wishes he could hire me and it sucks, basically. And I
Uh-huh.
sent back a really nice, cordial note, basically
Mhm.
being like, I totally get it. Like, I wish you so much luck. And also, he had hired my friend Hannah as the script cord. So I was like, she's great. She's a great writer. Use her. She's
Mhm.
fantastic.
Mhm.
Um, just being kind changed my life, because he then went back to the network and fought for more money to hire me
Wow.
because he was like, that's energy I want in my room.
Wow.
So that's a great
That's
lesson.
amazing. That's a great lesson right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I, of course, I didn't do it being like, this is going to change everything. I cared about him. He was a cool guy and I wanted his show to do well. And
Yeah.
ultimately I got to work on it. It was a mini room. It was 10 weeks, or 14 weeks. I got, I got my first staff writer credit. And before
Amazing.
that show was even over, Beth contacted me and offered me a job to write on Billions season 7
All right.
because she had been
Yeah.
hearing such good things from Theo.
That's yeah. That's
Yeah.
right.
Um,
That's so great.
so that was great. And then I was a
Yeah.
story editor on Billions.
Uh-huh. So
And then
you
I
got to the
was,
next, you got from staff writer to story editor.
yeah, I got bumped up. I mean, that was like a fight with business affairs, but that has nothing to do with the annoying thing about this business is when you negotiate your contracts, you're fighting with the studio's lawyers
Yeah.
and like your showrunner doesn't really get involved. So like
Yeah.
the person you're working for isn't determining your title.
Yeah. That's
So it's
right.
like it's a
That's
weird
right.
thing.
Yeah. It's not between you and the person that you think of as your employer.
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, but yeah, so I got to the next level and then I'd also signed with managers in this time as well, who sort
Mhm.
of pursued me because of my mentor, one of my mentors from Invasion. He had been talking about how great I was, and
Mhm.
and then Rebecca was repped at the same company, so she talked me up. And if 2
Mhm.
people say your name in the same space, that constitutes buzz.
Uh-huh.
And so all of a sudden I had buzz, which I
Uh-huh.
find hilarious because it was
Uh-huh.
just 2 people saying I exist.
Yeah.
And they kind of pursued me and read my script and wanted to sign me. And after a few months of meeting with a bunch of managers, I did sign with them. They're amazing.
Uh-huh.
But yes, so then I rolled off Billions in October of last year.
Uh-huh.
And for a couple months I was pitching right at the end of Billions, my own
Uh-huh.
show.
Right.
And then December, like right before break, my manager called me and was like, there's this buzzy new sci-fi show at Showtime, and Showtime loves you because of Billions.
Mhm.
Um, we're going to put you up for it. And I was like, okay, cool. They put me up for stuff all the time that I never hear about again.
Right.
Um, but I
Right.
watched the movie that this sci-fi show is based on, that I hadn't seen in a lot of years.
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. I could do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the literal first day back from break, I got a call being like, you have a meeting, you have a meeting.
Uh-huh.
And I interviewed at the beginning of January, and then it took 2 months to officially get the offer, which was so painful.
Yeah.
But I've been on that show since the beginning of March now. And it's with the showrunners of Homeland, which are
Mhm.
just legends and fantastic people, and it's been a really good experience. And it's my first like out and out genre show. So That's really
terrific.
fun.
So you're 8 years out of college. Is that about right?
Yep.
And you're rising through the ranks of television writers. So that's a really great, it feels like you've taken a lot of turns, but actually it's quite a rapid rise.
It
You've
is.
gone
It's a
quite
charmed
a long
rise.
way
Yeah.
in a short amount of time. Charmed, but also based on some very smart decisions and a great
Yeah.
attitude that really helped you out. Well, I want to open this up to questions before, we've only got about 15 minutes left. Do you guys have questions that you would like to ask of Mae? Anybody? No? Okay. Assad, make sure you're on here.
Yeah, you're talking about the notes and stuff, and receiving like a note behind a note. So what are some ways that you've been able to like finesse your way to like use a note but still be able to get your creative vision out?
Can you repeat just the end of that?
Yeah. So Assad is looking for examples of times when you've received a note from a studio and had to find the note behind the note, and how you've managed to solve a problem without using the studio's terrible solution.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. On my Hightown episode, we got a note at the end. It had a very like soft emotional end, which is good because it's like towards the end of the season and we're trying to like land something. And the studio was like, what if someone takes a shot at her right at that time?
Uh-huh.
And we were like, no, like she's having this incredible moment,
Uh-huh.
And we had to figure out what that meant. And what it meant is that they wanted just a bigger bang at the end of the episode, right?
Uh-huh.
So what we did is we still preserved that end that we wanted, but right before that, we have, kind of the big bad of the season roll up and intimidate her. So like we kind of split the difference. We realized that they just wanted dread at the end, right?
Right. They wanted to remember
so
the stakes. Yeah.
They wanted to remember the stakes because everything is like, what if the audience forgets that this is important? Which is something studio execs are very afraid of for some reason.
Yeah.
And a lot of their things will just be about clarity, right? Like, I think they were like, oh, why is she upset again?
Yeah.
Remember they read scripts for 20 different shows every day,
Right.
So that's the mindset they're coming from, and we have to be like sensitive to that. But yeah, it was they wanted higher stakes at the end, and they wanted a sense of dread and an upbeat instead of a downbeat. So we still and we think what we did actually made it better because there's this like threatening, heightened thing, and she still manages to have this small emotional moment after, but it's charged with all of those stakes now because it's right before. So sometimes it's like keeping what you want but giving them what they want to, and a lot of times like the whole point is to take their note but make it better, right?
That's right.
You never want to take a note and have that make the script worse. You need to figure out a way to make it better.
Take a bad note and still make the script better. Yes.
Yeah. I also think
the writer's job.
Yes. The most powerful word in a writer's notes toolkit is just saying like, oh, that's great. I'll think about that. Because you also don't have to take every note. You have to take enough of them that make it feel like they've, and I think knowing what is or isn't good for your script is really, important and something you hone over time.
That's right. It is your project and you have to know it best.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mae? Who else? Jacob, let me turn the.
You mentioned that you've written for both a show and a movie, correct?
I've written like spec features, like features, that I'm not being paid to write, that we're trying to sell, but I have only written on shows so far.
Okay. So writing on for a show and having it more episodic, what is that like? What in terms of like the breakdown of each episode and each episode on set with each having with everyone around as well? How is like that not being steamrolled, and how are you able to get an episode basically out of it without too much going on at once? I would say from a writing background.
Yeah, totally. I would say, the way that we approach story in most rooms, I mean, every room's different, is you break character arcs first. And then you kind of think of tentpole events for the season and you lay them out and you build the episodes around that, right? And then you, with those in mind, you break each episode one at a time. I still have not had the opportunity to go to set for one of my episodes. I was supposed to be on set for Hightown, but because of the pandemic, I wasn't allowed to be. So seeing how that all plays out on set is still something I'm really hoping to get on my current show. And, you know, lower level writers being edged out of set is like one of the big things we're fighting for in negotiations right now.
I have a question for you.
Mhm.
I understand from Beth that the sample that got you hired on Billions was about, I think she said commodities trading. Is that correct?
No, it was about crypto. It was fully about
crypto.
it was fully
How-
about my experience. Yeah.
So right now you're working on a science fiction show.
Mhm.
Did you use the same sample to get the science fiction show?
Yes, I did. I have a lot of samples, but that is honestly the only one my reps send out.
Really?
Because it's really voicey, it's really unique, and genre matters less than character in TV. Because a lot of times the upper levels that they're hiring are the people who are like, I've been writing crime shows for 45 years, you know?
Right.
So for lower level, they're like, we're just looking for some interesting character stuff. We're looking for people who are good on the page and people who have a reputation of being really collaborative in the room. And yeah, so my crypto show has gotten me hired now on a crime show, a finance show, and a sci-fi show.
Right. And all of that with one sample. You haven't had to write a second.
I've written others, but we don't send it out. We're trying to sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
really interesting. And I know a lot of writers who feel the same way, that one sample, I know people who are still getting staffed off of samples that they wrote in 2004. Like, I think keep writing is always the rule, never rest on
Right.
one sample. But honestly, if something's working, your reps are going to keep using it.
But as students are crafting their samples, it's really about writing something great with strong characters and a good voice, less so than trying to write for exactly the kind of show you want to be on.
Absolutely. Like write a show that shows your point of view. Because that's what people are going to ask about. Like the less subtle way that some people will ask is like, tell us why you write. Which what they're really asking is like, perform your trauma for me. And Beth actually has the best saying of this, is like, you never have to get naked for a job, emotionally or otherwise. So there's a version of your story that you will have to craft that is not so vulnerable that you feel like you're just like bleeding in front of strangers.
Right.
And that is its own journey, I would say, in the early part of this career. But your script should do most of the speaking for you. And say like, this is how I look at the world. This is the way I approach story and character. And if it's your sample, don't worry about it being like producible. Don't worry about it being cheap. You can write the most expensive, ridiculous thing possible as long as it's attention grabbing.
Cool. All right. Are there other questions for Mae? Got another one from Jacob.
So writing something like, say, writing for a crime show and then going to something like sci-fi, was there anything that like you kind of had to look at differently or do differently or like keep in mind when writing a sci-fi versus like anything else?
I mean, I watched more sci-fi movies in the lead up, I would say, and sci-fi shows just to like see what was current. So I wasn't pitching things that just aired like, you know, a minute ago. Frankly, I haven't, like, sci-fi shows are not my bread and butter as a viewer either. I honestly watch a lot of comedies and then I write on pretty dark dramas, I would say. I'm a truly genre agnostic writer. Not everyone is like that. Some people are really like, I am a sci-fi writer who writes about, you know, women of color in these worlds. I don't have like a pithy way to say what I write. I write about institutions that fail and exploit individuals. That's all. That can be any genre. And I think I knew I was being hired for character. So my main thing is to look at the themes of the pilot I was given and think about the character arcs that that will work from that theme and that will really resonate there.
Okay, I see a question from Ada.
What is your technique when you're having writer's block to like move on to something new or like innovative for yourself? Because I feel like sometimes when I have writer's block, it's like go back to like basics and like how do you think you, instead of just like falling back from what you already know, you take that next step to actually improve your work?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is fill your cup. Like if you have writer's block, stop writing. Go out and do something. Go talk to people who don't work in this industry. Like get out of the bubble, because I think the thing that causes writer's block for me is if I'm only thinking about writing, if I'm only thinking about TV, like read a nonfiction book about an interesting thing, like go see a movie you never would see before. You know, talk to random people at a bar. These are the things that I think fill your cup. Go on a vacation if you can, or take a day trip. These are the things that tend to get me out of those blocks. I think there is a tendency when you study film, which I did, to write things that are just homages to other things that have been done. And like, honestly, my biggest advice to be a writer who is like interesting to producers out here is to have other points of reference, to read things that have nothing to do with this industry, to, you know, have expertise in things that have nothing to do with film and TV.
All right. Other questions for Meg? Anybody? No? All right. Well, thank you very much, Mae. That was really helpful. It was wonderful
Awesome.
to speak with you, and I think very helpful for the class.
Great. I'm so glad. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any more questions. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye all.